The other day, I was exploring options for a go-wide beatdown deck. So naturally, I was on the EDH rec pages of Toski and Tavalar. And on those pages, I found something that bothered me. On both pages, 60% of decks run Cultivate. Now, obviously, EDH rec has some inherent flaws that get further compounded through users of the website. It would be cool if somebody made a video about that or something. But still, 60%. With a commander that's low mana enough not to be boosted out by the ramp part, and who draws enough cards not to need the tacked on land to hand, you could spend that 3 mana on literally anything else. There's also some questionable draw run in these decks, whose commander is an insanely powerful draw spell. So what gives? Well, I think this ties into the culture of hailing certain cards as must-plays, one that exists both online and in IRL circles. This sort of effect has likely always been somewhat the case among various circles in Magic the Gathering, since it's a social game with an established community, but EDH is especially vulnerable to cycles of overhype about particular cards. This is because it's an even more social format than the baseline due to having 4 players, and also, the fact that it's singleton and 100 cards means that there's kind of a lot of room for fluff in decks, and it'll take longer for players to identify a mediocre card than it would in a 60-card format. There will be the cards that truly should be added to most decks on the basis of power, Soul Ring, Counterspell, Mystic Remora, and you can go check out my budget cards video if you want my saucy opinions about them. But there will also be cards that are regarded in the same lens, but which truly don't belong in all or even most decks. And I want to focus on a specific category of cards among these: mana ramp spells. First, a quick overview. Ramp makes your amount of mana go up, typically permanently, barring interaction from your opponents. It's nigh ubiquitous in EDH due to the slow speed of the format, with the first and second most played non-land cards in the format both being ramp spells. And don't get me wrong, ramp is fantastic, and there are lots of great ramp spells out there. But as you can probably guess by the first couple minutes of this video, I have opinions about some of them. Specifically, I think people tend to gravitate towards certain ones that are considered staples, even when there are other options that are much better suited to their deck. So, treat this video as a guide, how to stop jamming Cultivate into every deck, and figure out what your deck actually wants instead. Hopefully there's plenty of nuance to be gleaned here, but this is a video principally stemming from me getting upsetty spaghetti about Cultivate, so let's talk about that first. Cultivate, along with its twin Kodama's Reach, is a rampant growth that costs an extra mana and has a Lay of the Land attached. It's a straightforward formula with some clear appeal in a slow format, and evidently Wizards agreed in 2011. It's in all 3 green precons in the first EDH set. This alone likely contributed to the card's popularity, and honestly, the card is right at home in these decks. 3-color decks with questionable mana bases and a healthy spattering of 7 to 9 mana cards. When you play Cultivate, you're actively choosing an extra land to hand rather than the speed of a 2-mana ramp spell, and this is absolutely a trade-off that some decks want. The more colors you play, the more that extra land will matter, and color fixing might be a valuable goal in its own right if you're running a lot of colors with not a lot of budget. If you're playing 5-color and you have any 3 colors of mana that include green, a turn 3 Cultivate sets you up for a turn 4 with a mana of each color available. That's a great deal. This usefulness as a setup piece is most obvious in a 5-color deck, but the same logic also works in decks with fewer colors. As a general principle, Cultivate is best geared toward decks looking for a pivotal 5 or 6 mana turn. This brings me to a major consideration when picking out ramp: mana curve. A lot of decks will have 1 or more major mana value numbers that they care about, and your ramp package should be formulated to fit this. My Glissa deck wants to play Glissa on turn 2 wherever possible, followed up with more ramp spells. So if we look at a graph of the mana value of the deck's ramp spells, it's big spikes on 1 and 4 mana, and a smaller spike on 7 because the deck is a disgusting greed pile. There are only a few 2 or 3 cost ramp spells, since the deck prefers to skip 2 mana and play Glissa on 3 mana, and the ramp spells of these costs that are in the deck either create untapped lands or have flexible mana costs. When you're adding a ramp spell to a deck, you should be asking, what is this ramping toward? Wanting more lands in general isn't necessarily the wrong answer, but if the most important mana value you're pushing toward is 4, you shouldn't run a bunch of 3 mana ramp spells. This is part of what prompts my eyebrow raising when I see 60% of Toski decks running the card. It doesn't ramp into the commander, it takes up a mana slot that could have gone to a card drawing beater, and the commander itself encourages volume of creatures rather than size. This means you probably don't want that many cards on 5 or 6 mana other than, I don't know, Mr. Squirrels. The commander also draws you a ton of cards, and if your deck has 33 forests, each of those draws has a healthy 1/3 chance of getting you the exact land you want. You're playing a monocolored deck, and if you play Cultivate, you're effectively overpaying for ramp that gives you an upside that you don't need. I find Cultivate questionable in Tavalar for similar reasons. 2 colors is still few enough that the color fixing probably isn't necessary, and Werewolf's top end consists of, a handful of 5 and 6 drops. Rampant Growth is almost certainly better, but I'm not sure I'd even go for that over a 2-drop beater that can draw you some cards. Card type is another consideration with regard to ramp, since artifacts and especially creatures will die to removal and board wipes, but land destruction is much less common. However, Dorks and Rocks are often more efficiently costed than cards that grab lands, so there are trade-offs to be had. They all have their place, but the places tend to be different. Obviously, for non-green decks, bless their hearts, you're mostly stuck with Rocks, but that doesn't necessarily mean green decks will never want Rocks. Single green Dorks tend to be the most mana-efficient ramp option at lower budgets, so I tend to go for them in any deck where the 3 CMC slot is important, but the 2 CMC slot is unimportant. My Glissa deck and my Maria deck both have 3 mana commanders that they try to land on curve, but Glissa runs Dorks because it has very few 2 mana plays, and Maria runs Rocks because the 1 and 2 mana slots are very important for the deck. In a third one of my green decks, Scapeshift is a key piece of the deck, so the deck runs mostly land grabbing spells in its ramp suite, even though they're slower than single green Dorks. Long story short, different decks will want different things, and these are just a handful of examples of what I ended up on with my green decks. A final consideration when considering ramp cards is the net mana cost versus the upfront mana cost. For something like Rampant Growth or Cultivate, these values are identical, since they don't immediately offer more mana, but some spells give you untapped lands. For example, Skyshroud Claim has an upfront cost of 4, but a net cost of 2 if you grab forests that enter untapped. 2 ramp spells that I generally prefer to cultivate in 2-color decks are Harrow and Grow from the Ashes, as they grab untapped lands and thereby allow for more flexible turns than a card that grabs tapped lands. If we look at mana rocks, most theoretically offer mana immediately, but in practice that can differ by when they're played and what deck is playing them. Signets can be a net mana cost of 1 after turn 2 if the symbols line up, but on 2 mana they can't do much else. Similarly, colorless tapping rocks like Mindstone add mana immediately if you have a place to put 1 colorless mana, but if you don't, they're just the sticker cost. I like to think I've offered a little toolbox here in picking out the most appropriate ramp, and as a final point, I'll address an important question I've been skirting around so far, that being how much ramp a deck should run. This question honestly depends on so many factors that I'd feel irresponsible offering a straightforward answer or even a framework. The best way to tell the right amount of ramp for your deck is, well, to play it and see if it feels like it has the right amount of ramp. If you're ramping to a particular value, does the deck succeed at that consistently? Does it do so too well, eating up deck space and leaving you with awkward spare mana on a lot of turns? There are also differences in the size of mana ramp spell, so if you find yourself drawing too many ramp spells but want the same ramping capability, you can cut some small ones for a bigger one or two. Conversely, you can do the opposite maneuver if your opening hands seem consistently loaded with expensive ramp spells you can't get to quickly enough. There may very well be strong ramp spells, Elvish Mystic, Nature's Lore, Thought Vessel, that don't end up being quite what your deck wants, and this is okay. The best ramp solution isn't going to be one size fits all. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say here is simply that you should look at your deck's ramp suite critically. I think when it comes to the traditionally simpler parts of an EDH deck, the lands, the removal, the ramp, a lot of people have the idea that they can kind of gloss over these things and focus their efforts on the juicy synergies that comprise the spiritual core of the deck. But these parts are what lets the core of the deck do its thing smoothly, so taking a critical eye toward them will likely improve your deck more than you think.